You, my friends, are just in time to Take a Shift, a revolutionary podcast hosted weekly by yours truly, Belinda and Catherine, that will literally alter the trajectory of your life.
We're on a mission to listen, ignite, and transform, challenging ourselves and you, dear listener, to journey deeper and get uncomfortable. Discover what lies beyond those layers of fear, judgment, smallness, and everything else that's been getting in your way up until now. Choose to step into new possibilities and courageously wake up to the life you know you were meant to be living.
So buckle up, Buttercup, summon your curiosity, and together, let's take a shift.
Welcome, and we're so glad you're here. My name is Belinda Zilberman, and I'm joined by my friend, my colleague, my soul sister, Catherine Hart, and we're so excited to have you here. This is our first official podcast, and some of you have been perhaps introduced to us via another podcast we did with Kristen at the Mental Health News Radio Network. But for those of you who don't really have any orientation to who we are and how we got here, we thought today's episode that we're calling Before the Shift would be a great way of introducing you to us, and also a great way for Catherine and I to reconnect to our path of how we got here, and really to get grounded for today's podcast and future ones as to why we're even doing this to begin with. So thank you for being here, and we're excited, and let's jump in. So, hi, Catherine.
Hello.
I'm, of course, super excited to be with you. You know, we've been spending months, or we could even say years, getting to this point, and it's just been such a pleasure and honor to know you and to work with you and play with you and learn from you and with you. Why don't we get started today with just sort of maybe sharing where we met and how we met, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's perfect. I think it's lovely. Let's do that. Let's fast forward to the beginning.
Fast forwarding to the beginning. So why don't you share a little bit, since I've been already talking our listeners' ears off.
Yeah, but I love to hear you talk. So the way we met was we met at the University of Santa Monica. We both had been seekers, and we'll talk about that later on in the podcast. But we decided to take a leap of faith and attend the University of Santa Monica. We were in the same class, same year, and I met you, let's see, I think right after I had gotten up and spoken that first or second week there. And that's the first time I think you and I had introduced ourselves to each other and met. So we started exactly there, and that was year
2014.
14, yes.
Yep.
So USM was a master's in spiritual psychology based out of Santa Monica. And when I say USM, it's University of Santa Monica. There were, if I recall, about 150 in our class. We didn't graduate with quite that many, but 150 other seekers from around the world. Now, not just the country, but literally the world, because some of our classmates were from Great Britain. We had several from Australia, several from Mexico. Let's see, where else were they from? I mean, literally all over the world.
Yeah, UK,
Canada.
Switzerland, Canada. Yeah, it's quite amazing.
Yeah, so everybody flew into LA, Santa Monica area, met on a Friday afternoon at 7, and we stopped Sunday night around 7. We did get to sleep in between there, but it was probably just the most amazing experience of my life. Before I had gotten to that point, I was I was signed up to basically, had been accepted to a program for an executive MBA program at Baylor. And that was a pretty hefty price tag that went with that. And I was really questioning myself, like, okay, I'm going to be 50 years old with this experience with an EMBA. Yeah, the experience would be great, but if I died 2 years after I did the experience, would I be really glad I did that experience? And my first answer was no. And I was like, go to USM, because I'd been playing with USM for probably 5 years. And there's just something that told me go to USM. So
Mm,
I was like, okay, I'm not doing the EMBA. That there was not enough of an emphatic yes, yes, you will love this. I was excited to do the experience, wasn't excited with the $90,000 price tag, but I was like, that's just not it. And then the minute I was like, I'm doing USM, the universe lined everything up. And then, of course, I met you, and the greatest, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, joy and experience that came out of those 24, 27 months together. And then right before graduation, we spent how many days in Palm Springs together doing our final. Oh my God, that was intense. It was that whole process, but it's just been
mm,
amazing. And I'm so grateful, like so very grateful for having, from being in this moment in this chair and on this mic with you and all that we've done in between there, that that was just divine.
mm.
So that's where we did it. That's where we met. 2014. When did we start? August 2014?
I think
September.
September. But it's so wonderful to listen to you speak about that experience. And I remember that moment you stood up in our classroom and spoke, and I was blown away and was like, I have to know this woman. I have to meet her. And I remember when we went on a break after that, sort of shuffling quite quickly in your direction, and you were already surrounded by a dozen people who were also, I think, feeling this need to get to know and get close to this woman because you had just shown up in such a powerful, curious, vulnerable way and made us laugh and cry all at the same time. And it's a moment that is burned in my memory. I'll never forget that. And it's interesting how you talk about the different choices you had at the time, because I remember feeling I had learned about USM in my 20s, and I remember my choice back then was travel around the world for a year with my husband at the time or go to USM. But I remember like there had to be a big shift, there was some things I really needed to shift up in my life at the time, and I was faced with those two choices, and we ended up traveling and taking a year off and doing that. But USM was always somewhere in the back of my mind, and it would only be, all those years later from, gosh, the difference was we traveled in 2001 for the year into 2002, and then it was 2014.
Wow.
Actually, when my mom was in the final stages of cancer, that I was reunited with this idea, I should say, through a couple of coaches that I was at a conference with. When I asked them who their teachers were their coaches, they said Ron and Mary at USM. And I remember thinking, wow, I was really impressed by these people and their perspective. And so I learned about USM that way. And when I was questioned by friends and colleagues and some family about why I was going back to get another degree, already having had my undergraduate and my JD from a New York law school. And I remember thinking, like, there's no way I'm going to justify this decision to you. There's no financial benefit. I mean, it's always nice to have letters after your name, but I remember thinking there was something compelling me now, spanning over 3 decades, in the back of my mind, knowing that this kind of education, this next step in my seeking, was going to eventually happen at some point or another, whether it was USM or something else. And, I couldn't agree more that our friendship and our collaboration is the best thing that really came out of this, as two soul seeking sisters on the planet, really looking to put our insights and our curiosity and our learning and our pain and our vulnerability out there to share with people so that they feel that freedom to do the same.
Well, and I think one of the other parts of that magical 2 years, 27 months, however long it was the fact that we were already basically, as I referred to, awake. We just woke up in some of the deeper states, and that was so vulnerable. Everybody there so vulnerable, so sacred, and that really was a huge bonding experience for all of us, especially you and I, as we progress through the program together. And 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 since then, I mean, we've been on a call with another one of our members that graduated with USM, with Karen, with us for 3 years now. So we are coming in our third year of doing a every 4 to 6 week call together. Never recorded, never. It was just a date we scheduled, and we basically, at USM, we called that the trio, and that's what we've done for 3 years. I mean, we've got 3 years of podcasts behind us had we recorded, and it's still all about waking up and mirroring back to each other for the highest and best of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what you give me, that's what I give you, and that's what it's about. So, and one of the things I want to do with this is, you were talking about your degrees. Why don't you kind of give some background, like, and talking about waking up, talking about seeking, why don't you give us some background how you got there? I mean, as far as you were a much younger seeker than I was, as we know, but give us, especially our listeners, give them some background how you got to USM.
Mm. Oh, and I'm so glad you asked that question, because as you were talking, I was thinking the same. Like, let's talk about what it means to be waking up. We hear this term woke, right? Like, he's woke or she's woke these days, and I'm always curious about different people's interpretation. For me, it's funny when I'm asked this question, I feel like I answer it differently every time, because in any given moment, I feel like my sort of waking up, which I really equate to asking lots of questions, to which no one around me has the answers. And recognizing that at some point, I was going to have to look within for those answers. But probably the time that I refer back to most would be being around 12, 13, 14, this kind of preteen into teenage transition, where I just felt really dissatisfied with the experience that I was observing around me, of not just my parents, though I do reference them quite often, particularly those years, of two people who it seemed to me like were really resigned. To a certain degree, they were resigned. It didn't feel to me like they were creating something new, that they were asking deep questions. If you were to ask them questions about life, I was thinking about what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I don't know, there wasn't a lot of dialogue, there wasn't a lot of curiosity. And then in my religious environment, we were not religious, but I did have a bat mitzvah when I was 13. My dad's side of the family is Jewish, and he was a Holocaust survivor. And so I did attend synagogue until I was 13, Sunday school. And I didn't feel like I was finding the answers there either. There was something deeper about, really, why are we here? Like, really, like when I would think, is it really to just go to work every day and make some money and come home and eat dinner and watch TV and then go to sleep and do it again? That was my environment. That's what I saw people doing. And so I think this burning question of why are we here? Like, is this all there is? Was the question for me, that probably from the age of about 13, even to today, I was just saying to my husband yesterday, like, remind me of what my point is on the planet, why I'm here. Like, I'm 50 years old and I'm asking the same question. Of course, I think I ask it with a lot more glee and joy now, because it's a question that I play with one that I get curious about, one that I challenge others to be asking. But I would say that if when I think about awakening, when I think about elevating consciousness, it really is simply a question of asking questions and being willing to sit in that discomfort of not having the answers, but being on this journey, continuing to be in a question and having that be okay, even if it's uncomfortable, even if I feel depressed at times when I don't know the answer, or joyful when I feel like I do. And that's been, I guess I'd say, a 37-year journey now that I continue to be on in these questions. So that's how I'd answer that question today. How about you?
Well, I was raised religious. And so, I can remember so many, I mean, Sunday night, Wednesday night, being there. And so and that was a big part of my growing up, was being in a religious environment, Sunday school with my grandmother. And then my whole family went to church. And so, I just was like, oh God, I'm just not getting this. This is just like, I just didn't get it. Like, I did it because it was mandated under the rooftop, if you know what I mean. Like, that's what my parents did, or that's what my mother did. My father didn't, sperm donor didn't do that. But it was mandated. So that's what I did until I could make my own decisions. And that wasn't when I started, I moved out when I was 18. That wasn't something that I did after that. Now, I may have visited a few churches, but that was just not something that was called to me in that religious aspect when I was on my own, making my own decisions at 18, 19, 20. So it just was really, and in my 20s, it was the seeking of finding a career. I came from a pretty fractured home life, in the sense of my parents got divorced when I was 12, my brother was 7, and it was just from the time I was 12 to the time I was 16. I think I lived with 7 different places in between that, with my grandmother, my dad, his new wife, and then back to my mom, back to my grandmother. So in the sense, I think we've talked about this before, as a teenager, that was about survival. I never went to a prom because I didn't know anybody long enough to, like, go to a prom or go to whatever with them. So because I was basically very in a survival mode, like, go to school wherever that may be. I went to 5 different schools in 4 years. That made me an extrovert. I think I was already an extrovert, but helped create the extrovert part of me because I had to be to survive. And never really got to make a lot of connections there. That was very frustrating to me. Was not very connected to my family whatsoever. I mean, I had a family life, but a lot of times I wondered where my people were, because I was either too loud, too big. We've talked about this before too. I was too much, like, too much energy, too much this. Whatever it was, I was too much. I'm a Taurus. So I was born May the 9th. I was born on Mother's Day. And so I used to laugh with my mom and say, I'm the gift that keeps on giving. I don't think she really got that. But, it just, like, I can remember, and it's going in my book, at 17, I wrote a poem called Why Am I the Bull in the China Shop of My Own Life? Because I never fit in, never really fit in. And there's a lot of pain underneath even saying this right now, that I've just never fit in. My own family, the schools I went to, I just never fit in. And I always was thinking, what's wrong with me, right? Like, it's on me. Well, bullshit, it was not on me, because I was perfect at the time. I was struggling. I needed tools. And so in my 20s, I was on my own at 18 and going out there, creating my career. I started at 17 years old, actually, when I was a senior in high school, as a leasing agent. And then at 18, I was a full-time assistant property manager I moved 2.5 hours away from my mom's home after the weekend I graduated. I think I moved because I had a job waiting on me, and it was a great job. And I was moving from Charlotte to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Katie bar the door, it was on from that time. And that for 10, 12 years, I built a sales career. And I remember 12 years, I was 28 years old, 29 years old. And I remember thinking, that's really when I started waking up. That's really when I started seeking, because I had a job that I got on a plane to go to work more than I did a car. I traveled the country. I started out as a leasing agent at 28, 29 years old. I was national director of leasing. I was traveling all 35 weeks out of an entire year. And I was making pretty good money for a kid with no college degree, but I had a lot of guts and I had a lot of fortitude. And that's when I really started waking up going, is this it? Like, just exactly. There was no joy or glee when I asked that at 28, 29 years old. It was out of a desperation of, I have hustled since I was 17 years old, and this is it. Like, I have the title of National Director of Leasing, and there's no joy in it. It is one hustle after another, one deal after another, one closing after another. And I get a moment of happiness, of a success on a deal, and then I got to go to another disaster to create a perfect deal out of a disaster. And that's when I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I looked around the landscape of my life at that point, and my peer groups were nowhere near, had no fire in their eyes, divorces, they weren't happy, whatever the problems were. And that's really when I started waking up and going, what in the world? Like, this cannot be all there is, because like people wouldn't people wouldn't hang around if this was it. Like, this is too much. This is just the hustle. So that's really, you were a seeker much earlier than I was. I was in survival mode. And then I learned to put the roof over my own head and keep it there. So at 28 is really when I started asking the questions and started really seeking pretty intensely at that point about waking up and about the religious aspect. I remember we were at my uncle's funeral, and I remember asking my mother and my aunt at that moment, I said, do you really believe that if a 10-year-old child in India had not claimed the blood of Jesus Christ and asked for forgiveness, that they would be condemned to hell? And they were like, yes. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I don't understand that. Like, there's got this precious child that just wasn't exposed to Christianity. So I really had these questions about Christianity and religious questions and God. Like, my big question was about God. And then I had a question about heaven and hell. And I was like, do you really believe that hell is a gnashing of teeth and heaven is the streets of gold? And they're like, yes. And I just could not get on board with that. Like, those three questions, who is God, what is heaven, and what is hell, those three questions were the questions that shook me awake. But I had to answer those.
And I think you really highlight what so much of the struggle is about, whether it was me as a teenager or you in your 20s. What I see every single day on the street, just sort of this kind of vacant look, I think, that a lot of people have, of like feeling like they have to force themselves to believe a certain interpretation of reality that just doesn't feel accurate for them, but not knowing, like, even to be able to have permission to ask those questions. It's like, particularly, I think, our religions, as you're highlighting, but also our educational system, family structures, our judicial system, laws, they're all set in a way for us to have set certain realities. Like, this is what you believe. Like, right now, I mean, not to bring politics into it, but there's no question, we're recording this during the impeachment, that there is a side of people who believe in a reality and another side that believes in a different reality. And it's like, we're not asking questions about the reality. It's like, it's either this reality or that reality. It's like, well, maybe, what if it wasn't? What if there were other things going on? What questions are we not asking? But instead, there's this, and I think when you talk about survival, I do think that part of our survival need is to have certainty. Like, we're all seeking, in a way, even as seekers, lifelong seekers, when we find a sense of certainty, even if in a moment, it's comforting, right? It's really comforting to believe that there is a truth, there is a reality. It's more comfortable than not. But at the same time, it's like, what's the price that we're going to pay for that? And I think this is going to be so much about what we're exploring on this, is what's been beautiful about our experience of getting to know each other, and our educational experience at USM, is staying in the question all the time. Like, the minute we thought we had the answer, the minute we thought we figured something out, yes, maybe we were elevating our consciousness and having a certain new awareness, but it wasn't a place to sit in or stay in. It was like just the next launching point into another series of questions, another series of inquiries that were really, in the end, all about, I mean, to me, leading us to one thing, which is, how do we open our heart more? How do we live in unconditional loving? How do we co-create peace on the planet in our individual consciousness, right? And these structures, part of what's happening right now, I think, in the bigger dismantling, not just, I think, in our personal selves, the dismantling of these belief systems that have limited us up until now. There's a dismantling of systems all over the planet, whether they're religious systems or governmental systems, or the relationship between men and women on the planet is shifting. I mean, there's just so much shifting, because I think we're being called to be asking more questions and getting more curious, and recognizing in the end that we're creating our reality, not like it exists out there and we have to live into it, but that we're actually creating it in our speaking, in our thinking, in how we engage with each other, and especially in how willing we are to ask more questions and free ourselves of the need to have answers, the answer, be right?
Well, exactly. And talk about dismantling. When you're asking, you've been raised a certain way. For me, it was Christianity. When everybody around you in your family unit and system, and basically most of your friends were Christians, and in this religious milieu your entire life, and then you ask these questions, and innately your answers are not their answers. That's when you really, like you got to be brave. You got to be so brave. like like I remember how brave I didn't think of it brave at the time, but I look back on me and I think you were really brave in those moments to really even have the conscious thought of that. I don't think that's what I believe. I don't think that's, I mean, and that my whole life was at stake at that point, in the sense of what I knew it to be. And I was in the process, that's when I dismantled it, because I had to unpack it for me. I had to find what resonated with me and my belief system, not what I had been made to accept because I was a child and you were going to church and you were going to do this, and then what was presumed that I would accept. When I became an 18-year-old woman living on her own, it was presumed I would continue this way because that's how my entire family did it. And it worked well for them and still does. And it works well with millions of Christians. It just wasn't mine. So I basically, and I started hearing my voice at that time. Like when we talk about when you start getting to know yourself and open up to that, and you start dismantling what has been given to you from family structure and environment, and you start unpacking that to find your own voice, that's when you really, I mean, you really do have to be the frontier, the pioneer on the frontier of your own life.
Mm.
Write that down. We're going to do something with that later on.
I love that.
But I mean, truly, I mean, and it's a very scary place to be because you feel very isolated because you don't know where you're going with it, but you know you just can't stay where you've been.
Yeah. And I think when you said earlier, talking about it, you didn't have a tribe. You didn't know what your tribe was. I mean, thank goodness we're going to have, loads and loads of podcasts to follow up from this one. But for sure, I would love to go into more deeply about what that process is in finding our tribes, because part of what is dismantling from a lot of different perspectives, but we don't live in more traditional ways. There's so much movement in the US and around the world. Like, we're a global economy now. We're so much more connected between airplanes and the internet. We don't have those structures, and it's been a gift and it's been a challenge, right? The way that it used to be, where families stayed together and stayed in small communities, that certainly exists in places, but now it seems to me it's being someone who's lived all across the country as well as outside of the US, I've seen more movement. It's most people do not live in the town that they grew up in, or at least I won't say most. I don't know what the statistics are, but there is a lot of movement. So what does that mean? People have to, they are going out on their own. They're separating from those family units. They're doing a lot of self-discovery, almost just because they don't have a choice, because now they're in different environments and they're challenged in different ways.
Well, and when you say tribe, like if you remember when I got up to speak at USM, what did I say? I said, I found my people.
Mm.
And that I knew, and you'll hear me say this a lot, I knew, like I knew my name, that those were my people. Just that nurturing environment, non-judgmental environment, and the ability to be not right, not wrong, but just to be.
Yeah.
And that's where I knew I resonated. And that was home to me. Like, that is when I got up to speak, when you heard me speak for the first time, that's when I knew. And that's when I said out loud, these are my people. Like, I didn't know much of anybody at that point. It was only maybe the second month of USM when I got up to speak. And I'll have to say, like I've always said, because I always laugh and say I want a t-shirt that says, where are my people? But really, like, if I really think about that now, Belinda, my family unit are my people. They have taught me, like, my mother has taught me so much about, like, going after what I wanted in life. She has taught me tenacity. She showed me that way. Like, we may have not have been what I wanted a mother and daughter to be, but that life lesson, she was my person for that experience and that lesson. So that was my tribe. I wanted it to look differently as a kid. I wanted it to look like a freaking Hallmark channel. Like, that's what I wanted it to look like. And so I didn't get that, and I wanted that. And so that is something that they are my tribe. They're my family. And I learn a lot from them in the current relationships of where we're at and where we are. I'm at 54 years old, and a lot older than when I was at 15 wanting certain things. And this 54-year-old girl still wants those things, but that's not going to come in this lifetime. But these were my people. My tribe. I just had different lessons to take out of it. And when I say my people are that nurturing, like that resonating, non-judgmental people that allow you to just be and be worthy of just because of who you are. So when I hit USM, that was like salve to my soul of finding that environment with these 150 people that had flown in from around the world to be in this space and to just allow you to be where you were. I mean, even as we talk about this, like I was with my tribe, but that tribe growing up was to teach me some really poignant lessons. Do I wish maybe they could have been taught in a different way? Well, of course, because we don't always have the easiest of lessons. But they taught me. That's why I'm here today, because of my family tribe, because of my tribe of friends, because of my tribe of USM. That's why we're here today. So, I'm kind of like, as you talk about that, I'm kind of like, yeah, I didn't always resonate. I never really resonated much, but they were my tribe.
Well, and maybe that is the sort of the question and the thought, that the thread of this part of our conversation, which is like, who are my tribe and what is my tribe and what does it mean at different stages of my life? Because
Right.
I would 100% agree with you that now, as a 50-year-old woman, the book that I wrote and published earlier this year, I talk a good amount in the book about my family, and they're, among my greatest teachers. And at some point, I think, as we're evolving in consciousness and as we're becoming more aware, and looking at life a little bit differently, like, what is life here to teach me? What are the lessons that are available to me? Asking these are really different questions than, why did this happen to me? And why were my parents like that? And what did I do to deserve this? And why couldn't they just love me unconditionally? We sought environments as adults because it was important for us to get that love, to get that information, to get that affirmation from others. But in so doing, I think it also helped us have more compassion and have more gratitude for the experiences we came from as children. Because I know for me, one of the, not just the greatest, I mean, it wasn't simply to be the child of my parents and to learn everything they did have to teach me proactively and by their example. They were also teachers to me in compassion, self-compassion, compassion for others, and unconditional loving, because when I looked to their histories and when I looked to where they come from, I saw what they had received and what they hadn't. Right. And so in
Right.
so doing, it for me, that was such a huge part of my learning and my appreciation and gratitude of my parents. Not simply this, one of these phrases right now that we hear a lot is like, they did the best they could. And when I hear people say that, I've heard myself say that for a long time, but there was some like disdain and some judgment. It's like, I'm trying to accept the fact that my parents weren't perfect and I can't put them on a pedestal expecting them to be perfect. But really, I thought that they should have been perfect, but I'm going to say this thing instead, right? They did the best that they could. But, after a lot of reflection and my own healing process, and having, hundreds and thousands of hours of conversation with you and some other people in my life who I love and trusted to have these conversations, that phrase, like, they did the best that they could, started to soften and started to remind me that we all are doing the best that we can with the tools we have, the childhood we came from, the context we came from, the lessons we had learned. And so to not judge, certainly myself first and foremost, but then not to judge anyone else, or practice non-judgment at least, because we are judgmental creatures.
Right.
But starting again, even to look at, and if they did the best that they could, what's the opportunity from there? What's the learning? What's the loving? What's the opportunity?
Well, and I think, like, in order to heal, especially with, and we'll talk about this later on in whatever podcast that may be, but especially to heal the relationship with primary father figure, my dad, I really had to get to, and I was in my 40s when I really, quote unquote, healed that. I mean, there's still healing that goes on around that when I think of certain things that bring me sadness or frustration. But like, my father, as a soul being on this planet, really did do the best he could with the tools he chose to get. Like, we all have the choice to get our tools. We all have the choice to, if you don't like where you're at, then do something different. When I'm training residents at my hospital, when we're learning airways, I'm like, DSD. Do you know what that means? And they're like, no. I'm like, do something different. DSD, do something different. You got to breathe for them, and you're not breathing for them. So do something different. Readjust the jaw, put in an airway, whatever. But, we get that opportunity. Like, if we don't like where we are, then we DSD, we do something different. And sometimes I don't think that some of these souls on the planet, my father was one of them. I didn't have that experience with him. Maybe he had it with his other 3 children that he had by his next marriage. But, perhaps he did the best he could with what he could do. And I found a lot of I grew into a lot of compassion with that. When I saw it from a soul perspective, like in the sense of he did do the best he could with the choices he made, and now he's off the planet, and that's it. That was it. And like, if you can get to that point, like, I know for me, I found a lot of compassion for that. Mm-hmm. And it took away a lot of pain for me, because I understand as being a person when I was in my 40s, that I was doing the best I could. Mm-hmm. So I think, one of my sayings is, what we do for and to someone else, we really do to ourselves. So if you can find that compassion, like, and it really did help heal me. And it let me off the hook of beating that drum of, I wished you were a father this way. I mean, I can't tell you how many years I called him a sperm donor, because the word father connotated much more than, because, I mean, it was just a sperm donor.
And to even be able to say sperm donor without judgment, right? Without it meaning something condescending, but that also, just that phrase, because you said it earlier in the call today, right? Allowing it to evolve to a place where it's non-judgment, and for you, it accurately reflects at least one version of the story what you experienced with your dad, which was he performed a function, and he was very his contribution to you felt limited beyond that, and we can say that without judging him for it, right? And then if we have hurt that comes around it, or judgment, then that's something for us individually to work with, as opposed to continue to be in that suffering, expecting that it should have been different.
And that would never be my father's to begin with. That's mine, and I asked my brother has 2 girls, and I was like, you had the same father, sperm donor, that I did. How did you learn how to be such a great dad? You didn't have really, it's your own father. We didn't have that example. And he goes, well, I learned what not to do. So, I mean, he took that in the sense of, my grandfather was a wonderful, wonderful man, and both my uncles were wonderful men. And so we had those examples of wonderful men in relationship to us, uncles and grandfather, but we never had that primary relationship, dad, father. And so I remember my brother saying, well, I learned what not to do. And, he's an amazing father. So is an amazing husband. So that was his tribe. That's what he got. Mm-hmm. And so that's what he made. He made the most beautiful gift, because he has a wife and 2 girls, and what a beautiful way to learn. Is it the easiest way? No. Would he love to have a loving father? Blah, blah, blah. Of course, we all would, but we didn't get that. So we made hay while the sun was shining, I guess. Mine took a little longer. So,
well, and I think you said it earlier. What we end up doing in a way is finding how to give it to ourselves. And I think one of my wishes for this podcast, and I think I do this in every relationship in my life, and all the clients and just people that I meet, is this idea that we are I think in our personal evolutions and waking up on the planet, is starting to have this a more internally referenced life experience, moving from this external viewpoint that life happens to me or I'm at the effect of everything that's happening outside of myself, and moving into an internally referenced experience, which is what's happening out there is based on my point of view. Is my heart open? Is it closed? Is my mind open? Is it closed? What's happening inside? And that will have a direct effect on what I'm experiencing outside. So simply, as you said, it's not easy. There's no question about it. It's not a simple, I love to say on one hand, it's just a simple choice to love or not love, right? To show up open-hearted or not, to get curious or not. Yes, on some level, it's a really simple choice. On another level, with all of that accumulated pain and struggle and judgment and heartbreak and all of that, for each of us, some of those choices are going to seem really simple, and many of them are not. And that for me is what's so exciting about these conversations. Even in this one, for the two of us, we're evolving just in having the conversation and inviting other people into this conversation. It's a constant process. And I want to say, I think the number one, well, gosh, I probably have so many number ones. So before I say this, I should pause for a minute. But for sure, the very first time that this idea of walking on the planet with looking through the lens of non-judgment was when I read Deepak Chopra's 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. I'll never forget this, maybe 20 years ago or something. And I remember reading that chapter, and it might even be called The Law of Detachment, the chapter. And he talks about just taking a day where you have like a mantra. Today, I choose not to judge anything. And it was literally like, I felt like I had this little cap, like a cap with electrodes on my head or something that was making me super conscious that day. As I walked through my day and I noticed the thoughts that I had, seeing people in the street, interacting with people at work, whatever was going on. And at the end of that day thinking, my experience of the world shifted on that day because I recognized that judgment and all of these preconceived notions and this way that I was walking through the world was not defined. It was not set in stone. I actually shifted my whole experience by just having a different thought and a different intention as I walked through that day. And what I hope for everyone listening, and I hope you'll come back and listen to us again in future podcasts, is that that's how you view this experience with us, and then how you'll take that out into the world. This ability to simply say, today I'm going to practice this practice, or today I'm going to ask this question, or I'm going to see for 30 days what shifts in my family by looking at them a little different way. I really think that that's what this is about. And I think it's important to say, and Catherine, please chime in here. I think it's really important to say that we do this every single day. Like, we're not on here proselytizing. Our whole point is not to come on here and talk to people and be like, live the way we do or do what we do, and certainly not to ever say something, give some piece of advice, or it's simply, we're walking this walk together, and we're sharing, and we're questioning, and we're tripping, and then we're helping each other up, and then we're running, and then we do a big splat and we get a big cut and we heal each other. We're doing this. And I think why this is so exciting, this opportunity, this moment in time to be taking advantage of this platform and this ability to have a conversation with people outside of our cities, our states, our country even, is because we all need to be doing this to a certain degree a little more. Just asking some more questions, getting a little more curious, practicing non-judgment. The planet needs it right now, right?
Exactly. Well, ergo the name of the podcast, Take a Shift, because that is the basis of our own evolution, is shifting. I mean, it's the basis of everything, right? Even the tectonic plates of our world that we live upon. They're always shifting. So a bridge is always shifting, because if it didn't, it wouldn't be a bridge anymore. It would, snap in half or whatever. So we're always, that's the basis of our evolution. And that's the invitation that we have for, I think it's a reminder first and foremost for ourselves to always take a shift. Like when you and I have a conversation, you can mirror this back to me like nobody else on the planet, and that's why we're together. You can mirror this back to me for my most loving, highest self, and in your non-judgmental way, but always offering a different perspective. That's what we mean by shifting, or thinking about it a little bit different. And somewhere down the line, I want you to, in another podcast, we'll talk about not practicing non-judgment, because I think that's huge. I mean, we spent so many hours at USM just realizing what judgment, because we think it's normal, and that judgment is sometimes basically feels like it's part of our DNA, because we live in such judgmental eyes. So I will spend a lot more time on these podcasts about that, but just the ability to always be curious about, what if that's not really it? What if this is not all there is, what I see? What if this is not all there is and what I'm seeing before me? Or what if they really didn't, like when you get mad at somebody, what if they really didn't intend it to be malicious or mean-spirited? Like when you can open to that, just that one thought, you'll shift your entire being. And really, it goes back to what is heaven, what is hell? And I'll tell you, what I believe heaven is the state of mind that we reside within. Like if I'm depressed or angry, and I've been angry a lot of years of my life, like that was how I lived a lot of my life. You can ask my family that, and you can ask a lot of people that I dated earlier, probably up into my 50s. But, anger was my deal. And so, like, you just have to be open to, what if I don't have to live this way? What if I don't always have to be angry? What if I don't always have to be right? And just being open to the smallest of shifts in your own thinking, because you have your own answers, and we don't know what they are. You'll, as a listener of this podcast, you'll get there on your own. But that's as you call it, the invitation and the challenge. And that's what this podcast is all about, is just offering up a different way of looking at something or feeling about something, as you've alluded to, and being able to take a shift. And when you're open to taking that shift, that's when you find some transformation. You come out of the suffering, you come in and find some relief. You find a warm fire within yourself, and you're like, okay, I feel better now. And then you can move from there where you need to be. And that's transformation. Mm. So I love how you called that the invitation. And of course, there's going to be a million upon million hours of our conversations of this. And we could have already had that with the conversations we've had and our half dozen years together. But, that's what this is all about. And that's why we named it Take a Shift. I mean, we had a little fun naming that, of course.
We did. Well, I think we got to save up some more of this juiciness for future podcasts. So I think it's probably time for us to wrap up today. Catherine, it's been absolutely a pleasure and a joy, as always, to spend this time with you. And thank you, everybody, for everyone who's listening. You'll see in a link below, probably somewhere, links to our website and things that we're doing in our lives. And if you're interested, follow up with us there. And we can't wait to be with you on another podcast.
Had a great time, as always. Thank you for your time and your reflections.
Love you.
Love you. I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Thank you for listening to this episode of Take a Shift, a part of Mental Health News Radio Network. We are so grateful for your time and presence. Always remember, you're just one shift away from a better feeling day in your life. Until next time, remember to listen, ignite, and transform. Much love from us to you.